Last week, I had the great good fortune to hang out at the beach with a dear friend of mine who is an avid beachcomber. It was an overcast day when the sea was rather wild. In fact, that morning we had been reminded never to turn your back on the ocean because of the possibility of sneaker waves. But the lure of the sea was strong that day, and strong enough to overcome our concerns about weather and waves. As we walked along the sand, my friend couldn't help but investigate the many kelp holdfasts that had been carried on shore by the energetic waves. Now, a holdfast is a root-like base of a kelp that keeps the giant seaweed, which it is, attached to the rocky ocean floor. Holdfasts look to me like a great tangle of rubbery worms. Without them, there would be no kelp forest that provides wonderful habitats for otters and other creatures off our California coasts. Holdfasts are good at keeping the kelp in place under normal circumstances. But on the days when the ocean is really tumultuous, some of those holdfasts just can't hold fast enough. So the kelp fronds pull away from the substrate, and some get dragged up on the beach. What's most interesting about holdfasts, I think, is the amount of life they harbor. In the holdfasts on the beach that day, we saw barnacles, clams, tube worms, and anemones, plus some small rocks that were caught up in the holdfast's grip. On the still attached fronds, we saw colonies of single-celled bryozoa, which excited me because I remember them from paleontology class. They've been around a long time. And even some fish eggs. We marveled and photographed and maybe got a little too close to the waves once in a while. But of course, once the kelp lets go of the ocean floor, it is at the mercy of the ocean's dynamic and capricious energy. The previously sheltered lives are subject to an environment they cannot thrive in. And if thrust onto land, the microcosms can no longer survive. Well, with Mother's Day on my mind, I couldn't help but note that families at their best are like holdfasts, where parents create safe environments that nurture and protect children in a sea or society of dynamic and capricious energy. Like a healthy kelp attached to the seafloor, a healthy family is stable enough to provide shelter and stability for everyone. And a stable society, like a kelp forest, can offer some protection from those stormy seas so that the families can thrive. Made me think about how when my husband's first wife died, their two children came to live with David and me. And at the time, Jay was 8 and Andy was 7. So talk about a sneaker wave. That was it. There was a lot of heartbreak and a lot of grief and a lot of getting used to a new system, new family dynamics, new school, new everything. The holdfast held because of deep family ties, mine, David's, and his ex-wife's, that wrapped around the kids and protected them. And there were shared experiences like TV shows and silliness and bedtime stories, and an amazing thing called Social Security survivors benefits. The monthly cash payments made it possible for David to stop his full-time job and so that he could be at home with the kids when they needed him most. With that extra income and some part-time work for him and my full-time job with the healthcare plan, we were able to save our children, to give our children the care that they needed. the SSI buffered the chaotic and capricious waves of a death in the family. Now, that was only possible because David's ex-wife had paid into Social Security for many years. And although we were grateful for the money, we also felt kind of guilty for taking it when so many others don't qualify for that kind of a benefit. With so many families in more dire straits than ours, they don't get that kind of regulating support, and we did. So we were grateful, but also just felt the burden of that. Our country saw the benefits of stimulus payments and tax credits during the pandemic too, right? For families and children. The pressure on families was intense during this time. It has been, hasn't it? And so what a blessing to be able to receive some extra money to care for children. An AP report from September 2021 noted that stimulus payments moved 11.7 million people out of poverty, while expanded unemployment benefits kept 5.5 million from falling into poverty. Social Security continued to be the nation's most effective anti-poverty program. Yet these statistics don't show the severe impacts of the pandemic on the poor, the unemployed, the part-time workers, and gig workers. And of course, the impacts were generally far worse on those with traditionally excluded or marginalized identities of race and ability and non-conforming genders. These communities are already besieged by the tides of society, with few buffering agents to help them. So far, I've been talking about families, not specifically mothers. And that's because in this day and age, we need to recognize, really honor all those who care for children. This includes biological mothers, adoptive mothers, stepmothers, aunties, grandmothers, plus fathers, grandfathers, uncles, siblings, and trans and non-binary parents and caregivers. Have I left out anybody? If so, I apologize. The truth is that it takes so many people to nurture a child, and so many people step up to take on that essential role. In the last few years, I've noticed the use of the word mama to mean all those who care for and nurture children. Mamas are a diverse group with one thing in common. They step up to take responsibility for raising children. In 2011, a group called Forward Together started what they called Mama's Day to celebrate the mamas that you rarely see on the Hallmark cards or in the commercials. For the prepackaged version of Mother's Day, they say is too small to capture the reality of dynamic, expansive families. This group in particular focuses on mamas who nurture and protect trans youth, people who are hit by wave after wave of anti-trans legislation based on misinformation and bigotry. It is hard to be a mama with all those forces working against them. Also among the mamas at the margins are the Black mamas and caregivers impacted by criminal justice, and often criminal injustice, in that system in America. Did you know that 60% of people in women's jails have not been convicted of a crime? 60%. And 80% of them are mothers. So many of these women are in jail for small infractions of crime or crimes of poverty, like not receiving a notice of a court summons because they move around a lot. Many are awaiting trial in jail simply because they can't afford bail and they don't have a safety net, their own holdfast, to help them when they are condemned to a cage. And I realized I mentioned Black mamas at the beginning, and of course that's all women. But I lift that up because we'll talk about Black women organizing around this particular issue. Those who are not gender conforming, a high percentage in jails relative to their general population, are especially vulnerable because they are commonly criminalized and targeted and discriminated against for being different. It is hard to be a mama with all those forces working against you. So the Mama's Day Bailout is a program to get Black mamas, women, femmes, and transgender or gender nonconforming people out of jail so that they can be home on Mother's Day with their families. This work is done through several nonprofits across the country, like the SC Justice Group based in Oakland. And the organizers say they are coming for their own, which I love. They're coming for their own, to get their own people out of jail. This form of care, of reclaiming, of love, is an example for us all. The SC Group also supports mamas with a family member in jail. When a partner is incarcerated, the work of caring for children falls on the mamas left behind. A huge burden on what may already be a very vulnerable family system that must carry on the outside, while also often supporting and fighting for the person on the inside. These are family systems that need strengthening, or they are at risk of being lost at sea. Now, back in Julia Ward Howe's day, women didn't have the vote, but white women used that power and privilege that they did have to work for an end to war and for gender equity. Many people opposed Howe, but her calls for peace and abolition and liberation of women were on the right side of justice. Today, people of color are using the power they have to work for the worth, dignity, and equity of marginalized people everywhere. That's Black, Indigenous, people of color, transgender and non-binary, the disability community, and so many others. They need the help of those like myself, who have so many privileges in this society, whose holdfasts have been reinforced by relatively calm seeds and deep roots. Together, we can work to end systemic oppression in the criminal justice system, in education, in housing, and in so many other spheres. The work is hard and slow, but it is critical. As Cynthia Dewey Oka writes, the revolutionary struggle against a colonial, racist, heteropatriarchal capitalism is the struggle not only for a social universe that is meaningful and just, but lives that are inherently precious. There will be no liberation without us knowing how to depend on each other, how to be encumbered with and responsible for each other. Excuse me. Dry throat. Nobody likes to see anybody cough in this day and age. Sorry. We need to use our collective power to overcome the entrenched belief that there is a level playing field, that the protections so many of us enjoy are available to all. We need to see past the headlines and the false narratives that paint poverty and criminalization as a choice, rather than as a societal design feature. We need to bear witness to the chaotic and capricious and systemic energies in our society that selectively hit those at the margins and keep them at the margins. We need to support the work led by those impacted communities who know best how to help themselves. We need to support mamas so that they can be mamas. And we need to vote. Let us deepen our mutual dependence. Let us be willing to be encumbered. Let us be responsible for each other. None of us can do the work of liberation alone. None of us. As Reverend Susan Frederick Gray reminded us last week, we are woven into a single garment of destiny. Let us be the holdfast for each other, committed to nurturing all life amidst a chaotic and capricious sea. May it be so. Amen. And now, please rise in body or spirit to sing our closing hymn 1051, We Are.